Just when you think you've got a grasp of how college football is going to be, these rankings maybe make sense, someone has to go and throw a wrench into things. And the first week of college basketball is in the books, and there's already been upsets, and I'm for it. And lastly, the NHL has been going on for some time now, and there's one team that is making history, and we're going to talk just about that. I'm your host, Matthew Reardon, and this is Total Sports Talk Beyond the Lights. If I were to tell you that in the same year in college football, both Georgia and Alabama have 2 losses, would you believe me? Probably not. If I were to tell you that Indiana is a top 10 in college football, would you believe me? You probably wouldn't. And if I were to tell you that one of the Heisman frontrunners is coming from the group of 5, would you believe me? I sure as heck wouldn't. With me today is none other than David Street.
Hello, everybody.
And also, we've got Ed Smith. And guys, if I told you all 3 of those things, you'd probably say, you're crazy, Matthew. I don't believe you. There's no way all 3 of those things are true. Well, they are. Alabama and Georgia both have 2 losses right now, which seems to almost be unheard of, at least in the same season. Indiana is playing some of the best football that we're seeing in college football right now, and they continue to show it on a week basis as they are undefeated in the Big Ten. And lastly, Ashton Jeanty is on pace to breaking Barry Sanders' record at Oklahoma State and deserves to be on top of the frontrunners in Heisman contention. All of that is impressive, and welcome to 2024, the year of the anomaly. You have entered the twilight zone. I mean, Ed, all of those things, can you believe that all those are happening?
No, and we've entered a world beyond sight and sound. For those that know the old Twilight Zone entrance there,
Yes.
and there are some points to how college football has gone about its business this year versus years past that I'm sure we'll talk about here shortly, in a little bit more detail. But my goodness, has anything gone according to plan? I don't think so.
No, that's exactly it, David. Nothing has come to plan, right?
Yeah, no, the last time we had a season this crazy, I remember, was back in 2007. I remember Missouri, Kansas being the top 2 teams. Missouri was actually the number 1 team in the country very late in the season. And of course, LSU wins the national championship with 2 losses, being so far the only team in the BCS/playoff era to have 2 losses in a national championship. So back then is the last time I can remember we had a season this crazy. But so far, I think this season might be even crazier.
It really is. And there's one specific conference that we're going to talk about that's even more drunk. But first, I want to go over some of the top results here in the top 5. Oregon Ducks took on the Terps, Maryland, and they pulled out the victory at home, 39-18. It wasn't the prettiest of games, but ultimately Oregon started running away with it. Wins are wins. They are having to adjust a little bit with the injury to their star wideout, Tej Johnson. Hopefully he comes back at some point during the playoffs, but we'll see with his shoulder collarbone injury. But nonetheless, number 1 team continues to roll. I expect them to be number 1 once the new rankings come out. The number 2 Buckeyes, they sure look good. I know it's Purdue who they defeated, but they shut them out at home. Jeremiah Smith set several records for a true freshman at Ohio State, which is impressive. It was, whose record was it? It was receiver for Minnesota.
Chris Carter?
Jefferson.
Chris Carter, yeah. Chris Carter. I'm pretty sure Chris Carter's records at
Oh, are you talking about like Ohio State record?
Ohio State as a
Oh,
true
okay,
true freshman. So I think he now took over receptions, touchdowns. I mean, Jeremiah Smith is the real deal, and ESPN reference, as they always do when you're watching their game. He's only 17 years old, so it's just like Ryan Williams on Alabama. They always bring that up, but he looks like announcers will tell you, scouts will tell you, he may be the best wide receiver that the Buckeyes have ever had. And if you go over their stud receivers, that's impressive. So he's a name that's going to be a household name. I guarantee it, if it's not already. But the main game here that took place that we need to talk about, and that's the number 3 Georgia Bulldogs against Ole Miss. And David, let's start with you. Did you anticipate the outcome of this game?
No, not at all. In fact, I thought that Georgia was going to soundly defeat Ole Miss. And I thought I had logical reasoning, that being that when push comes to shove, Lane Kiffin has demonstrated time and time again that he chokes. Well, kudos to him. He finally did not choke this time. And I think there's a few things here that need to be mentioned. That one, Georgia is not the feared team that it once was. Okay, they are absolutely still a title contender, especially in this new era of college football that we're in, right? But they're no longer the top dog, pun not intended, right? And then once again, Carson Beck continues with his struggles, and at this point, Georgia has, well, maybe not at this point, really pretty much all of the season. Georgia has been winning in spite of Carson Beck, and not necessarily because of him. And actually, real quick, Ed, since it's going to go to you eventually, but Ed, I remember in the beginning of the season when when I foolishly said that I think Carson Beck is going to have like a Joe Burrow type year. Not that he would have the same year as him statistically, but he would have the kind of year where he elevates everybody around him. And you kind of pushed back and said, well, without Brock Bowers, without Lad McConkey, I don't see how it's going to happen. And I have to give you credit because you pretty much called it, that without the weapons that Carson Beck had last year, he sure as hell has looked like a different quarterback.
Well, he certainly has not proven to be the guy that, while not as talented, but the proven winner that Stetson Bennett was. Yes, we make fun of Stetson Bennett of what he's done since he's left Georgia and how pedestrian he was, but he knew how to get the ball to the playmakers, the absolute stud athletes that are on that roster, and just let them do their thing. Carson Beck feels like he is trying to be Joe Brady offense, a Joe Burrow pocket passer, that type of quarterback, when what Georgia is based on is defense and running the football. So with him, without having that be the main focus and the focus being on Carson Beck being the stud quarterback, it's just not working out. He's got to have everything around him working out well for him to do the job that he needs to do. Yes, he looked great going in hurry up offense against Alabama a few weeks ago, but that was because everything was so simplified by going fast that he did not have these complicated reads that he needed to get through. Just and with this weekend, with him playing against Ole Miss, they didn't go to that. They tried to continue to play, NFL in the 80s type football, and it's just not what Carson Beck is designed to do.
Yeah, and keep in mind this game, very ugly conditions. I texted you guys. Everyone probably saw what Lane Kiffin said when Molly McGrath asked him about the weather conditions. And Ole Miss, without their star running back and their star receiver, you start looking at this game that this is going to be a Georgia Bulldog victory. And then when you see the first drive, Jackson Dart throws an interception. He gets hurt, and Georgia scores immediately off that turnover. you look at it, this is just going to go Georgia's way all the way. And boy, did that change quickly. And honestly, I have to give my team MVP here to Austin Simmons because he came in when Jackson Dart got hurt, drove that team down, and tied the game up with a touchdown of their own. Where if that didn't happen, and yes, Jackson Dart came back, Georgia could have had all the momentum in the world. But that touchdown drive that Austin Simmons, the backup quarterback, had kept Ole Miss in that game early on. Jackson Dart ended up coming back the next drive, and the rest is kind of history. But when you saw Jackson Dart go down and you saw him slam his helmet, you're like, this is going to be an easy Georgia Bulldog victory. They're going to cruise. And no, that didn't happen. And that's because of the lack of offense. Carson Beck did not look good. Had one interception, which was better than the rest of the games he's had. But he had no touchdowns. They only had one touchdown the whole game, and that was on their very first drive, which I find very hard to believe. But I can only imagine, and David, I'm sure he can, what Kirby Smart is saying to his players in there, because we've heard some of his talks before, and they aren't pleasant to be around, right, David?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely not. And one team that should be worried. Georgia's playing Tennessee this upcoming weekend, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Tennessee. You're facing a Georgia team that got killed by Ole Miss. Yeah, rest in peace to you. And speaking of Jackson Dart, Matthew, I don't think we talked about it on the show. I think we talked about it off the show, right? But for me personally, a reason why I did not have Jackson Dart among my Heisman favorites is because his numbers were inflated against inferior competition. Well, guess what? He beat Georgia, and sure, he may not have looked like a world beater beating Georgia, but at the end of the day, he still beat Georgia. So I think now you have to include Jackson Dart among those Heisman hopefuls, in my opinion.
And with Jackson Dart going out the way that he did, he came back and it almost created like a Willis Reed moment from the Knicks all those years ago, where he's just kind of limping out there, and hopefully he can make it up and down the field or up and down the court in Willis Reed's case. And everybody just rallied around him, and it was like, hey, let's go. If this guy is going to come out here on a broken wheel, then we got to step it up. And step it up they did. They really beat down what we consider the strength of what Georgia is, and that's the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. That's what the biggest thing that I took from that game.
I think another thing too, fellas, that we need to talk about is that this was the kind of game that Georgia had coming. Okay, this is the same Georgia team that only beat Kentucky 13-12, I think. The same Georgia team that struggled against Florida. And this Georgia team has not looked like the world-beating Georgia team that we're so accustomed to seeing. So it's not surprising whatsoever to see a result like this. But I think this could end up being a blessing in disguise for Georgia, because when you get pounded like that, there's something to be said that it kind of forces you to readjust how your team runs, and just it sucks to get killed in the moment, but it can turn into a blessing in disguise for you.
Well, with you saying that, David, I'll ask you guys this question. Does the win mean more for Ole Miss, or does the loss mean more for the Bulldogs? Because with you saying blessing in disguise, I'd almost think that you would lean towards it means more for the Bulldogs.
Oh, for me, there is no question that this is a win that means more for Ole Miss, right? Why? Because Georgia and Kirby Smart have already proven themselves, Matthew, okay? Whereas, as I've talked about before, I picked against Ole Miss because when push comes to shove, Lane Kiffin chokes in the big moments. Well, he proved me and a lot of other people wrong. And so that's why I say this win means more for Ole Miss than the loss does for Georgia, because of the way that they being Ole Miss have proved so many of us wrong.
I'm going to say this loss means more for Georgia, and not because it doesn't mean a lot for Ole Miss, but it means, in my mind, more because with the exclusion of divisions and conference in both the Big Ten and the SEC this year, we all talked about, on and off the show, how Penn State is going to be uh, the the bearer of great fruit by not having divisions because they couldn't get past Ohio State and Michigan all those years in a row. Well, if you take a look at it from the other side, who is getting beat down the worst for having the loss of divisions? And right now, I think it's Georgia, because for so many years, we've seen Georgia have maybe that one or two games where they really have to ramp it up for a team that's on the up and coming versus, and then in the SEC championship game. Whereas now, with the lack of divisions, they've had to play teams that were traditionally in the western side of that western division of the SEC. Ole Miss, Alabama, and guess what? 2 losses. So it just goes to show that the grind of the SEC is even greater now that there are no divisions, and we are starting to realize that Georgia, while as good as they have been, they were not going to be a team that would beat every other team to death week after week after week. They had to have certain weeks where they would get up for the up and coming teams in that side of the conference, whether it be Tennessee one year, whether it be Florida one year, whether it be South Carolina one year. Those all were games that they could get up for because they still had teams that weren't at that same level, like Vandy, like Kentucky. You know, those type games were just kind of easy wins for them to get things kinked out until it was time to turn it on for those bigger matchups. So yes, this loss means a lot more to Georgia because they have to realize that they are not playing the same type of teams and schedule that they were doing over the past 4 years with Kirby Smart, and that those monsters that they had where they could kind of ease through us and out athlete some of the other teams. Now they're playing on an even playing field with everybody else, and here we are, they are just about even with everybody else.
Yeah, to play devil's advocate, I think it's pretty equal here because Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss needed to get over that hump. They beat a ranked team. They didn't choke, which I think is impressive for the Rebels. Where on the other side, like you mentioned, Ed, that this is uncharted waters that Georgia's in right now, at least recent, that it's a big deal, this loss. It really is. And now that brings them to 2 losses, both losses being in conference. So it's very, very interesting, especially when you look at the SEC, which we'll talk about here in a bit. So, like I said, to play devil's advocate, I'll go both here. That it's equally as important for both these teams because it really is. Because maybe this is the momentum Ole Miss needed, was to get over this hump finally and beat this ranked team, beat a Kirby Smart led team, and maybe that'll get them places. So we'll see come the end of the season, but we still got a couple of games left.
And guess what? There's the stat that ESPN loves throwing around where it's like Georgia is 100-0 against teams not named Alabama. And so for the first time since 2020, Georgia has lost against a team not named Alabama.
Yeah.
That's like the most cherry-picked stat of all time.
I know. Alabama was their kryptonite. Well, not anymore, apparently. So, but that was not the only upset this weekend. We saw number 4 Miami Hurricanes go down against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. It's almost like, when was this going to happen? No offense to Miami, but there were some very close games that they got lucky to kind of escape out of. Well, this was one of those games where they couldn't. Georgia Tech just seemed to have their number offensively and defensively. And I was very impressed with how they just handled things. Haynes King, with his running ability, it just really threw Miami out for a loop. It really did. And like I said, this was expected to come eventually, right, David?
Well, I think if there was one stat, Matthew, that made the biggest difference, it was third down. Miami converted just 30% of its third downs in that game. Georgia Tech converted 64%, and that was the biggest difference.
Yeah, I mean, you have to convert on third downs. That is such a key stat in every game, in every great team, if you want to have a great season. And they struggled in this game against Georgia Tech. But, Ed, what does this loss do to Miami? I mean, uh, does this ruin things for them? Obviously, I talked about there are teams out there that love to play spoiler, and this is the year of Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and it isn't just in the playoff race that spoilers are happening. This is a spoiler for the ACC as well, because this is creating an avenue for teams outside of Miami to have an opportunity to play in the ACC championship game, even though Miami got off to this big lead in the ACC standings. So the other part of this is Georgia Tech is really trying to show that they are a program that is on the rise, and it's hard to show that you are a team on the rise until you have that signature win. Well, a win against a top five playoff college football playoff ranked team is one of those signature wins that can turn a corner for a program so they can take the next step and be in contention year after year after year. Now, for Miami's sake, they are. Cam Ward doesn't play defense, and they've got the Miami defense has to be able to get off the field. To your point, David. But you know what else they need to do? They need to stop the run. They need to be able to stop a team from just slamming it down your throat time after time after time. There were 48 rush attempts by Georgia Tech in this ball game versus 24 for Miami. And of that 24 that Miami had, 5 of them were Cam Ward just trying to get free. But you look at Georgia Tech's roster, and they had 3 by Haynes, 6 by Singleton, 6 by Kool-Aid, 3 by Alex. They were spreading the ball around in the rushing game, and the Miami defense had no answer for it. So it was just keep it going, keep that dynamic offense off the field, and then make a play to get off the field yourself on defense when you can. So overall, this truly exposed Miami's weakness and really showed that Georgia Tech does have a future well beyond this year, and it was a I'm not gonna. It's hard for me not to say heartwarming because Georgia Tech is a team that I've always looked at as, oh, it'd be great if they were really good, and here they are and had a game like this. So I'm excited for the future of Georgia Tech.
Well, guys, I have breaking news. I actually have exclusive footage of the people in the ACC headquarters after Miami lost. Darn it! Why? 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 We have been helping these jackasses all season long. Why?
Yeah, and I can tell you right now who's not going to make the ACC championship game, and that's Florida State. What a turnaround for that program, and quite literally a big turnaround as they just fired their offense and defensive coordinator. They are clearing house. I mean, they aren't. The ACC's on fire because of Miami losing, but Florida State is also on fire because of what's happening there. But this opens the door for the Clemsons to be right back in it. They picked up a victory over the weekend too, so it's almost destined that that's going to be the ACC championship game.
SMU,
Oh yeah,
SMU,
I totally forgot about
SMU,
SMU. Yeah,
SMU.
Ed, get it right. It's SMU.
it's
Okay,
smooth.
SMU.
Yeah. Yeah, well no, that is absolutely right, Ed, because that is going to be quite interesting right there is SMU, Clemson, and Miami towards the end. I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I don't know if any of them play each other towards the end of the season, but that could uh, end up deciding that championship game right there. So that is a good thing to take a look at. But we talked about, Ed already talked about the defense letting them down with especially the run game. But can Cam Moore continue to lead this team to the playoffs? Because he put up 348 passing yards yesterday. They still lost. What more can he do? We saw that he had -5 yards on the ground, but does he need to run more? What exactly is it? Because, like you said, Ed, perfect analogy. He does not play defense. Okay, so something's got to give for them to go to the playoffs because they could play an SMU team in the championship game and lose. And at that point, what do you do with Miami?
Yeah, I think there's a chance that Miami gets left out. And that not only has to do with the ACC, it has to do with the SEC being such a cluster of teams all at that 10-2 mark that uh, is just the absolute nightmare scenario for every other Power Four conference trying to get teams into the playoff.
Well, speaking of the SEC, the Longhorns also pulled off an impressive victory over the Florida Gators. They are atop of the
Sorry, David.
SEC. They are atop of the SEC right now. The Longhorns are. But Ed, what's the Longhorns' remaining schedule look like? What's going to be their biggest test?
Oh, well, two rivalries renewed in the next three games.
Yeah.
We have a game at Arkansas, which last time we went to Arkansas, we got handed our you know whats, and just kind of had to hightail it back to Texas. Uh, then we have Kentucky, and then we have the game that probably will be deciding who goes to the SEC championship game between Texas and Texas A&M. Right now, it is just a small correction. By record, it is Tennessee in the lead for the SEC, but Texas A&M and Texas are right there, and we are on a collision course with the Aggies in Kyle Field after Thanksgiving, and I couldn't be more thrilled. This is this is more thrilling for me than the last 2 years playing Alabama, uh, and especially that night game in that night game at Alabama last year.
Yeah, and David, the SEC, we've seen it since the college football playoff came to form. Is you know we've seen a 2-loss Alabama team make it, and now that we've expanded things, the SEC seems to always be the anomaly because of the situations that they cause. We have a chance this year, especially if Tennessee loses to Georgia next week.
Mm-hmm.
And God forbid the Longhorns lose, Ed, too. We could have many 2-loss SEC teams going into championship weekend. What the heck do you even do? That's what's crazy. I mean, they're going to have to go through tiebreakers among tiebreakers, and it's just going to be pandemonium. And that very well can happen, Ed and
Yeah.
David.
Well, I mean, if you don't mind, I just wanted to say a couple things about Florida real quick,
Yeah.
since we did play Texas.
You did?
Yeah. No, Texas was just speeding up on nobody.
Yeah.
But all right, one, we played with the attitude that we were going to lose the game, and I find that extremely hard to stomach. And then number two, under no circumstances whatsoever is it acceptable for me as a fan to hear the announcer proclaim he's wide open for the other team. You hear that once, okay, whatever, but you hear he's wide open multiple times. It's just so hard for me to stomach. As I said, we played that game with the attitude that we were going to lose the game, and that is pretty much unforgivable.
Yeah, you never want to see your team be embarrassed like that. I'm not even talking about the score.
Yeah.
There are many factors in the game that could be embarrassing, and just like you said, David, that's one of them right there. So it is hard to stomach when your own team is being embarrassed like that on national television. So
Well,
I get where you're coming from.
yeah, I mean, I can handle being embarrassed if you're at least trying hard and the other team
Yeah,
is just better than you. But I can't handle being embarrassed because you legit are not trying at all. But it is what it is.
yeah, yeah. Well, uh, like I said, there were some upsets that happened, and now it gets down to this: is how much does this top 12 in the college football playoff get shaken up because Georgia lost, Miami lost. There's going to be a lot of shuffling around. I mean, I've already seen today alone that chances are there could be 4 out of the top 5 Big 10 teams from Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana. Uh, Things are going to be shaken up because the number 2 team lost, the number 4 team lost. Texas was the number 5 team. They're almost certain to be up to 3 now. I would say it's safe to say we got Oregon 1, Ohio State 2, Texas 3, but then that's where things change a little bit because was Indiana's win that impressive to bump them over Tennessee? They'll probably just look at it, well, 6, 7, and 8 won in convincing fashion somewhat. I know Michigan had a little late run there against Indiana, but I just
I got
don't know how much that'll change.
Okay, by the way, I got a quick question about Oregon, Matthew.
Yeah.
Are you guys allergic to scoring 40 points? Because you guys have scored 40 points just once this season, and in the last few games you've scored 38, 38, 39. It's like there's something about that number 40 that scares you. Like that is an extremely random fact that I just find oddly fascinating.
Well, you know what's funny about that is that I saw a stat during the game is Oregon was tied with Miami and Indiana, actually, I believe, for the most consecutive games scoring 35 or more points. Granted, Oregon isn't scoring 40, but both Indiana and Miami, their streak was broken this last week in their games. So now Oregon's leading the college football with the most consecutive 35 plus point games, but
Nice.
35 to 40 is the range. So we top out right there. But no, believe it or not, David, Oregon scored their first touchdown in the third quarter all year on
Really?
Saturday.
Wow.
That is their kryptonite this year. Is the third quarter. We are the best first half team point differential in the country, but come third quarter, we don't know how to play offense, and that's embarrassing because Will Stein is a outstanding offensive coordinator. I so impressed with him, and led by Dylan Gabriel, and we have a lot of top tier talent on offense. To come out of half and not be able to score is not good because if there's a team that's giving us a very tough game and we can't score in the third quarter, the game could be over by then. So just shows you how lucky we were even against Ohio State because luckily our defense was able to shut them down.
For sure.
Yeah, so there's going to be shakeup, guys. It's almost guaranteed. How they're going to do it, I'm not sure, but LSU lost. Alabama did beat them. That was a very impressive victory by Alabama. They proved a point there that even though they got 2 losses, we're still Alabama, and we're gonna screw the SEC over somehow. We really are because of this. They went into Baton Rouge, and they call Mike Tyson. They tamed that tiger, and it's just they didn't look back really at all. So that was impressive. Boise State, I know they narrowly escaped Nevada, and so did BYU with Utah. Those were very close games, but guys, I just have to add that I talked about him earlier. Ashton Genty is on a tear. He is on pace to break that record. And here we are in a year where he could break Barry Sanders' record, which is so impressive, but he may not win Heisman because we have a guy in Colorado who's averaging over, 112 snaps a game. Uh, and he's top 5 in receiving and as a defensive back. That's also unheard of. So, like I said, it's the anomaly. It's 2024. You're in the twilight zone. We're in it as well. It's just crazy. It's crazy.
For sure. And as far as how far we see those teams that got the extra loss, how far they fall back, it's really becomes a question of, do they fall out of this top 12? Because I would certainly say that Georgia is still better than Notre Dame, but Notre Dame only has the one loss.
Yeah.
So where does that fall in? BYU, they needed some questionable officiating, I will say, uh, for them to still be undefeated. So does that mean that Georgia and Miami with 2 losses should be ahead of teams that have 0 losses? I That's a question that the committee's really going to have to, you know, be spending a lot of time considering before the rankings come out on Tuesday.
Yeah, and it's tough because if I were a committee member, you can't look at it, but you could, if you were to look at, if we were to put these teams head to head right now, who would win? And that's where it's tough because I think Alabama would beat Notre Dame. I think Boise State would actually beat Notre Dame. You could tell me I'm wrong, but I think Boise State would beat Notre Dame. Indiana, they've looked great, but if they were to play a top team, how would that look? So you can't really look at it like that. But I would say that Georgia and, well, Miami's going to be tough because it is their first loss. But Georgia, I would say, would be outside of the top 12 because Alabama's at 11 and Alabama beat them. So and Boise State's still winning.
But here's the question I have for the committee. Is it required for you to have a group of 5 team in the top 12? Because this ranking system that they have here has nothing to do with what the end of the season looks like. So there should be no loyalty to a G5 team being in this top 12 of their ranking system. So to me, Boise State, yes, they won, but I don't think that they're better than Georgia. They're not better than Miami.
Yeah.
Well, they probably are better than Miami. In my, considering Ashton Genty would probably run for 400 yards against them.
Yeah.
But do you bump Boise State out just to make sure that Ole Miss gets its time in the top 12? Because they have to be ranked higher than Georgia at this point.
Well, and that's another great question is, do these rankings even matter up until after the conference championships? Because Oregon being number one right now, they still will have to face off in a Big Ten championship game where things can change because that's how they rank the top 5 is the winner from the Power 4 conference championships and then a group of 5 automatic bid at the 5th seed. And then from there, that's when the rankings end up mattering. So, Oregon could go to the Big Ten championship undefeated, but lose to, say, Ohio State. Well, Oregon, would you drop them down to the 6th seed, something like that? Because that's when the ranking's really going to matter. Because right now, it kind of doesn't. That's just how I'm seeing things with the new playoff rules. So,
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, and like as far as a group of 5 goes, I have absolutely zero issue with including a group of 5 team because one, this season has been incredibly competitively balanced, right? And right now, barring other things happening, right now it's looking like Boise State is going to be the one that reps the group of 5, and let's not forget that Boise State almost took out Oregon. Now, granted, that was in the beginning of the season when Oregon was still trying to figure out who they were. So I get that. But my point still stands, especially with the first point, that this has been a very competitive season. It's a season where anybody can beat anybody. And so, I'm not really sure. And maybe I'm misunderstanding you guys. But I'm not really sure I understand this whole attitude of, well, why are we still including, the group of 5? Well, what is wrong with including them? Like, what is wrong with being fair and balanced here?
It's not that I'm against including the group of 5. I'm just saying that if you are truly ranking the top 12 teams in the country as it stands right now, including the group of 5 shouldn't be a prerequisite in the top 12 during the regular season. It only matters like you said, Matthew, when we get to seeding, not through ranking.
Well, then, you know what? I have a simple solution. Treat college football like professional football. Get rid of rankings altogether, so that way, whoever wins their conferences will end up going to the playoffs. Then you can have your wild cards like the group of 5 team. Okay, just treat it like professional football. Get rid of rankings. Only go by standings.
Well, yeah, and with it being their first year of this new rule, they're eventually going to have to make some tweaks because that's how they find out things that aren't working out. But I'm glad Ed brings up that question because that is a good question. Because are they? I think Boise State deserves to be there, but is Boise State there because they have to have them there? Because what if Boise State had 3 losses? Whoever the next group of 5 team, although they may not be as impressive, would they automatically bump them up to 12? So I get why Ed's asking this question because we're just wondering because Boise State happens to be at 12. Is it a requirement or is it because they really think they're the 12th best team in the country?
No, that's fair for sure.
Yeah, if Boise State loses another game, do you put Army there?
I was just gonna say Army. Yeah.
Hey, what about Navy? All right, don't
No. Navy
Navy lost
by Notre Dame.
So Army's still there. But yeah, that was gonna be my next point. Is Army's having a great season, but they are not a top 12 team in the country. So that was going to be my question too. So I mean, we'll find out. I bet Boise State belongs to be there, so maybe we won't find out come Tuesday. But I'll be interested to see as the weeks go on. On to college basketball, guys, because we got the first week in now, and we've seen some high quality matchups. So ESPN they put out this thing which I think is really cool. It's a matchup quality. I don't know who does this, whether it's analytic nerds or if how it's actually graded, but this first matchup that took place on Friday was North Carolina going into Kansas. They ranked this one at a 93.8 on the analytics scale. I'm just going to call it the analytics scale. All right. I'm sure they punched it into a computer. Probably an Excel spreadsheet or something. But Kansas is the number 1 team right now, led by Hunter Dickinson. They are a very solid team. They didn't look that solid when they blew their 20-point lead against North Carolina. They did come out with the win, which a win is a win always, but you always have that's going to hang, that's going to loom, is you had a 20-point lead. You're supposed to be the number 1 team. You couldn't ride that? Well, no, they couldn't because they gave it up. And the Tar Heels had a game-tying 3 at the buzzer that eventually missed. But, Ed, these matchup qualities, this is just the first of several that we're going to talk about here. But I really like how ESPN has this.
I absolutely love how college basketball will go ahead and schedule these top flight matchups in tournaments, in one-offs, in just regular scheduling before we get to conference play. Because this is something that will bring people to watch college basketball around their time watching football, just like us. So we can see some of the best matchups going into conference play, but also it makes a difference when we get down to bracket time. Yes, we're already thinking about brackets when we're making the schedule for the first half of the season. And these quality matchups mean something, especially in RPI when you're looking at 4 teams and the RPI of one team is so much better than somebody else. Well, you can kind of gauge it upon that statistic. Who is best suited to play in a single elimination tournament? And games like these really give us an idea of how well they played, not just the quality of the opponents, but how well they played in those games. So are they worthy of being in that 64 or 68 team field at this point, which if it goes to 96, I may just give up. There's just ways too many. But yes, the high quality matchups, and not just your traditional, you know, traditional 4 team Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, and enter fourth team here. Uh, we also had a high quality matchup with Auburn and Houston on Saturday night, and this was an interesting game to me because Auburn is a team that was coming back from a Hawaii tournament and had to turn their plane around about half an hour into the flight back to the mainland because they were fighting amongst themselves. They were getting in fistfights on the plane, so they had to turn back around and then get off the plane, deboard, clear everything out so they could get back on the plane and take the red eye flight back to Texas, where they were to play Houston in Houston. I've taken that flight. It is no joke. That is 9 hours in the air overnight. If you do not rest while you are on that flight, you are useless the next day. And I had anticipated this to be not a very competitive game because of that factor. But Auburn came out with the win 74-69, and it was the diaper dandy. Tahad Pettiford with 21 points, including 5 3-pointers, that really brought Auburn, brought them back, because up until the last 5 minutes of the game, they were kind of climbing their way up, and Auburn just kind of took over in that last stretch, and that was something that I was not anticipating for them to have that kind of stamina after that kind of travel.
Yeah, because they suspended 2 of their players as well. So they were already going to be lacking depth going into this game because of that. And it just, all signs were pointing towards Houston to win this game. But Auburn ended up pulling the upset here. David, do you have the stat line in front of you? Johnny Broom, how he did?
Yeah. So, if I can get it real quick. Yeah, so Danny Broom had 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 5 blocks. So it was a block party, mainly courtesy of Johnny Broom.
Yeah, I mean, people don't realize how much of an underrated stat blocks are. I mean, we see them all the time. I mean, so many players in the NBA have made it famous, but putting up 5 blocks in a game is impressive. So he had quite a game there. But yeah, with the distraction that happened on the plane, I'm still shocked that Auburn won this game. But that's impressive that they did. And really quick, I wanted to go back and point out something really key stat with the Kansas game is Bill Self picked up his 590th win with the school, which ties none other than Fog Allen. So that's great. So I really wanted to point that out. I feel like that was important.
I actually want to talk about the Kansas North Carolina game briefly as well, and I'm gonna ask this. So, you guys know that meme of Homer Simpson in his underwear, and he's standing there in a confident pose, and on the front he looks to be in good shape, but in the back, his back is being held up by a bunch of clippers, right?
Yeah.
The whole point of that meme is there's more than meets the eye. Well, what player on North Carolina do you think I'm referencing here?
I don't know who.
Ed, do you think you have a guess?
I don't.
I will tell you this. RJ Davis, okay? Because the front of Homer Simpson in that meme is RJ Davis averaging 20 points a game, right? But the back of Homer Simpson that's being held up by those Clippers is him shooting a putrid 29.4% from the field. And against Kansas, he was 3 of 15, okay? He may be North Carolina's leading scorer, but by golly, his shooting has got to get better because it has been atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, luckily it's early in the year, but yeah, when you have a big game like that, you want to know that your star player could show up. So that is big. So I'm glad you brought that up. But uh, there are several top games still coming. I mean, Tuesday alone, you got the Battle of Duke and Kentucky. We get to see the anticipated Cooper Flag, all right, that everyone loves to talk about. And the Blue Devils they're going into Lexington to face off against Kentucky. And then also we have Michigan State and Kansas. So these are all premier basketball schools. And like Ed already added, we get to see them early on in the year. I love that. I love that college basketball does this. They seem to make it happen, whether it's for the fans or not. I enjoy it. So this should be some great premier matchups between Duke and Kentucky and Michigan State and Kansas. So, but there's still a lot to come in the year. And as it is happening, as it's unfolding, you better believe that we're going to be talking about it here. So, we will be talking more about college basketball as it unfolds. And also another sport that we will be talking about because, it is that time of the year, and that's none other than NHL hockey. David, first thing that I have to ask you here is how's Tampa doing without Stammer there?
I mean, we lost 4 in a row. Although our fourth loss was I think it was either an overtime loss or a shootout loss. We um we we didn't lose in regulation at least, so we did get a point. But we've been struggling lately. But it's still early in the season, and we've had seasons before where we got off to a slow start, and then we kind of picked things back up. But I tell you what, as far as individual players go, I mean, Kucherov is still Kucherov. He's last I checked, he's tied for the league lead in goals scored. So
Yeah. Things don't change there.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it turns out elite players still play like elite players, no matter who's around them.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of key players, with my Pens, Sidney Crosby has done great as of late. He's been about the only player on the Pens that's actually doing good because we are struggling right now. It is not looking good early in the year for the Pens. I would not be shocked if Coach Sullivan gets the axe at some point during this season. I feel like patience is growing thin in the city of Pittsburgh. Uh, yeah, the Pirates, that's almost anticipated that they aren't going to win. But Steelers and Penguins hockey, uh, if you're not winning, you're going to have to leave. That's just how it is when you have such a sports city like that. So, Sullivan, you need to pick up some more wins. If not, I would say he will be out the door. But, David, the most impressive team, well, record wise in the NHL right now, that has set an NHL record for the best start ever is none other than the Winnipeg Jets. But I'm pretty sure you have a thing or two that you want to say about that.
Listen, at the end of the day, the Jets are the best team in hockey, bar none. And nobody is even close to them right now. But yes, you are right that when it comes to the Jets, there is more than meets the eye there, and there's evidence to suggest that the Jets are eventually going to regress. Because you look at their underlying numbers, one, they're not a good puck possession team. They're a bottom 10 puck possession team. I think they only have like 48, 49% possession. And usually how it works in hockey, I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but how it works in hockey is that if you're possessing the puck less than 50% of the time, that's usually not a sign of good things for you. And then the other thing too is that the Jets are, I think, they're sixth in PO, which if you don't know what PDO is, that's basically shooting percentage and save percentage, and it essentially measures how lucky a team has uh, been. And so it's basically suggesting that the Jets have been rather lucky in their games. Again, it doesn't take away the fact that at the end of the day, they are still winning their games. Okay, on paper and on the ice, they are still dominating their opponents. But these are numbers to suggest that, okay, they are going to regress. And honestly, Matthew, I don't even need to give you a bunch of advanced stat mumbo jumbo to tell you that a team is not going to go the entire season averaging 4.5 goals per game and two goals against per game. Like this isn't the 80s or 70s. Okay, it's a lot more balanced in the NHL these days.
Oh, absolutely it is. And might I add that, they play in the Central Division, that also the Minnesota Wild are coming out to a hot start, and the Dallas Stars, which have really controlled that division for a bit now. And Ed, I got to ask you, what are the expectations for the Dallas Stars? Is it the Western Conference Finals again?
It is, because that is the bar that has been set, and it is continued to be set as long as you've got Ottinger there, you've got Jamie Benn there, you've got all these guys that have been there, done that. They know what it takes to get to that level, and there is every expectation to not be at that level. You talked about Pittsburgh being a great sports town. Well, Dallas has won too, and they have expectations for their teams. And when they are not met, oh boy, do the phone lines at the local radio station blow up. Whether it's baseball, whether it's the Stars, and oh Lord, the Cowboys.
Oh, Ed, I gotta throw this out there, Ed, and I'm sure you already know this, okay? But did you know that, with the exception of one home game, and I can't remember who they played, I think it was the Cardinals, but I don't remember who they played. But with the exception of one home game, the Cowboys have lost every game at home by at least 20 points.
I heard that stat a little while ago, and that is right up there with when they were an expansion team in 1960.
Mm.
How bad they've been getting beaten.
And isn't this the same team? Sorry, Matthew, but just one thing. Ed, isn't this the same team that was undefeated on their home turf last year, and now they're getting obliterated on their home turf a year later?
Yeah, the Packers broke them. That's all I can say with that. The Packers broke them.
And
That's right. And that game was in Dallas as well. Well, Arlington technically, but yeah.
To be specific. Well, now they're blaming it on the sun being in their eyes. So they're coming up with the excuses for the stadium they built.
You're talking to two people, at me and Ed, who have to deal with the sun on a frequent basis. So cry us a river, right, Ed?
Exactly. My goodness.
I know. Good riddance. I mean, like I said, they're looking for any excuse they can right now, and now they're, like I said, they're blaming it on the stadium they built. So, I mean, whose fault really is it? But is what it is. So, yeah, that's a topic for another day. We will be getting into it. Well, the question still stands. I don't know who's more of a disappointment, the Cowboys or the Jets right now, but they both are very, very disappointing teams. Look how great that Devontae Adams trade worked out for you. That's the last thing I'm going to say of it. But
at least he got out of Las Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, but that's not saying much either, because look where he's at. So
exactly.
I'll answer the question real quick. I think the bigger disappointment has been the Cowboys, because you get Aaron Rodgers and you expect to do big things, but at the end of the day, the Jets are the Jets. Some things don't change. The Cowboys have been a very good regular season team for the past few years, and now they just suck.
Yeah.
Yeah,
yes, they do. They flat out suck. Yeah. I think it's safe to say it's not a secret anymore. But yeah,
it's not hyperbole.
No. Yeah, yeah. But that's about all we have today, folks. We appreciate you guys tuning in. And like I said, we will be talking more about college basketball, about hockey. But right now, things are getting hot, and I repeat, hot in the NFL and in college football. So we're going to be talking about that as well. So, but we appreciate if you guys hit that like, subscribe button, and share these videos, and comment as well. Let us know in the comments your opinions, your thoughts, and your predictions. I know it's early, but how are you seeing the Stanley Cup playoffs come out? It's never too early for those predictions. Same with college basketball. But we all know come March, anything could happen. So we look forward to that. But until next time, guys, we are rounding third and we are headed for home.